Welcome to the first episode of FinTech Townsquare. I'm your host Nehit, and today I'm absolutely thrilled to have Kunal as our very first guest on the show. Kunal is the founder and CEO of PowerCred, a Singapore-based FinTech SaaS startup revolutionizing the way small business data is utilized by financial service providers. In this fascinating data-packed episode, we'll be diving deep into the Indonesian data landscape, exploring the unique challenges and opportunities it presents. We'll discuss the powerful potential of alternative data, not only for underwriting, but also for monitoring existing loans and how it can transform financial decision making. Additionally, we'll learn about the data driven culture at PowerCred and how it contributes to the company's growth and success. So, without further ado, let's jump into the conversation and discover the exciting world of alternative data in Indonesia with our guest, Kunal Goel. Thanks, Kunal, for
Yeah.
speaking to us. Really appreciate you taking out time to help us understand how your business operates. And I'm also hopeful that this will be very valuable for our audience who are middle managers building financial services product in emerging markets and otherwise to learn from somebody like yourself and to make sure that they're able to both understand how some of these products work and also take some of these learnings in terms of building their own roadmap, their own product, and so on and so forth. So thank you for doing this for us, Kunal. So Kunal, if you can help us understand
Yeah.
like your background, how did you land to building PowerCred? What has your professional journey been? That
Sure.
would be helpful as well.
So, interestingly, from since I was a child, I've always sort of not been very comfortable with stability. I think that has also resulted with in me taking this leap of faith. But yeah, I mean, in the last 7 years, I have been heavily involved, in the fintech space, right? Prior to this, I was working in another startup, and that's where I was helping, lending institutions in building digital first products, right? That were enabling them to kind of digitize their workflows from a journey point of view, and as a result, sort of ease the customer experience. Second is build smarter forms, right, wherein minimalistic inputs to be given by end users, right, on their applications, so that the waiting time for a customer, right from the start of an application, whether it is a loan or a loan application, or whether it is an insurance application, or whether it is a CASA account opening application. So any kind of a journey, onboarding journey, sort of to simplify those processes. So I was working with a tech company that was enabling, that had built microservices that were enabling, making these products very easy for the customers to implement, right? That was the first part, and then the second part was, once the application was done from a lending perspective or any other origination perspective, right? The management of the account, right? That's where systems like loan management systems, etc. These products is what my previous startup was involved in, and I was helping them in my as a part of the sales team. I was helping them sort of scale up operations in Southeast Asia. So I was the first employee in Singapore, and yeah, I think it has been a very rich journey, more because of the fact that the a helping scale up a startup from in that 0 to 1 phase in a market like Southeast Asia. That itself was very thrilling. It was a massive roller coaster ride. Number two is that from a network point of view, I think the kind of connections that I uh, built in the kind of industry leaders that I met, that I've been working for 15-20 years, building financial institutions, whether it is on the fintech side, whether it's banks, etc. So it has been, I would say, very humbling to kind of interact with such folks in the market. And it was through this I learned how fragmented Southeast Asia really is. how what is Singapore kind of viewed as, how other geographies are following a similar pattern slowly, right? The kind of pace in which digital adoption has been taking place in different countries. And yeah, I think and that predominantly came with working with some of the largest banks, fintechs in the market, in Singapore, Vietnam, Philippines, and Indonesia, of course, right? So yeah, I think through that I kind of realized that there are some very core problems that are yet to be solved. And that's when the idea of PowerCred sort of came into being. um, it was actually towards the end of 21 when I realized that the data problem, the infrastructure problem on the data side, is something that is has a huge potential in this market, particularly because the growth uh, that this SEA market has seen over the last 10-12 years is phenomenal, right? In terms of adopting technology to conduct businesses, right? So this is where I wanted to solve the problem of aggregating data across multiple platforms, and making it easier for product providers across financial institutions to sort of consolidate data and build winning offerings for their customers, right? And particularly SME segment is what excited me the most, because I do feel that the consumer segment, a lot of these problems have been solved. There are some great fintechs in the market that are solving this particular problem. But SME, the beauty of an SME is that while the categories of data sets are so fragmented, right, but still the number of tools that SMEs use, right? There's so much of rich data available that you can sort of understand everything about a business with the tools that they consume, right? And that's what enabled me to kind of build what we
Fair
do
enough.
at
That's
PowerCred today.
super exciting, Kunal. So, in fact, I remember when I packed my bags and moved from India to Southeast Asia, I thought very naively that Southeast Asia is a big opportunity, and it reflects largely in, like, India in terms of people still being physical, offline transactions. And I couldn't be more wrong at an aggregate. Like, for example, you think of Southeast Asia as a blob, and you realize that each of these countries are so different. And again, as you said, that Singapore, while leads the pack, it's a small market. And then you move to Indonesia, Vietnam, they're still far behind what India is right now. And therefore, the challenges are humongous. So, for example, things that you expect exist in India and Singapore might exist in Indonesia and Vietnam, and it's far, far from there. So this becomes extremely relevant as a problem statement. Do you remember the time when you thought that you need something like Power Grid? Like, do you remember that? Was it a meeting? Was it talking to a co-founder? Was it talking to a friend? When you realized that, what, this has to be built. That moment of epiphany.
So, very interestingly, this the thought of PowerCred happened through a conversation with a customer. In fact, I was very involved with a implementation in Singapore with one of the large global banks, and a very dear friend of mine who happens to be the head of head of business at that global bank, right? So he kind of took me for a stroll and told me about certain problem statements, whether the particular startup that I was working with could solve or not. And he touched upon briefly on two very exciting areas. One is that uh, the pain points that he had was that while he is comfortable with lending to a certain segment, right, of SMEs, he was not able to capture the larger segment, right? And that's where you go down to the smaller SMEs or the micro SMEs. And he said it's very frustrating because the real meat lies there. And while we were just helping them digitize the forms and making those forms much smarter at the at the level at which they were lending today, but expanding that book into sort of going to the mass segment. That is something that, it was frustrating to him that he wanted to do it, but he was not able to do that. And the second is through this, underwriting this segment from a dynamic perspective, right? Wherein they could choose, XYZ parameters and basis that give a line of credit, and that basically becomes very customized for each borrower, right? So that's where the aspect of dynamic underwriting comes into being. Like, you can, if there's a universe of 40, 50 parameters basis which you're underwriting an SME, you can pick any 5 or 7 parameters and at least extend the line of credit, whether it's a smaller line of credit or high line of credit, or sort of extend the interest rate or lower the interest rate, right? Change the structure of the loan as you keep monitoring the health of the particular SME over a period of time, right? So these areas is something that he really wanted me to solve as a part of that other startup that I was working with. And that's when I realized that, of course, I mean, each startup has its own core strengths, right? But I definitely did a lot of digging towards Southeast Asia as a market, and I realized that there is so much data available in the market, unstructured, structured, right? And nobody is really leveraging that data, right? Nobody is using that data to understand, mainly because of two reasons. One is accessibility of the data itself, and the second is, people still are learning how to make sense of that data, right? So this pain point is something that drove me to kind of solve what we're doing at PowerCred. This, along with the conversation that I had with my co-founder 2 years back, wherein I just randomly asked him to sort of so coincidentally, one of my friends was a seller at a e-commerce platform, and I randomly, over a drinking session, asked my co-founder to see if this guy can is worthy of getting a loan or not, right? And within a week, this guy actually got me an integration with Lazada, and he was able to pull out the entire historical data of this customer. So, and he being a tech guy, right? I mean, it didn't take him much time to kind of dig into the APIs that are available for this, and that's when I decided that, this is what it is. This is the guy that I'm supposed to get in bed with, and
Nice. No,
this
no.
journey, right?
Got it. No, this is super,
Right.
super exciting. Actually, to be honest, a lot of what you said is kind of resonating with my own personal story as well. For example, like a few years back when I took a sabbatical and I was trying to build my career roadmap. So I'm being a product guy, so I built product roadmaps, but I also wanted to build a career roadmap for myself over next 10 years. And I eventually chanced upon this exactly same learning that you mentioned, that for example, right now when we talk about fintech products, we still see same products that existed 50, 70 years back. All we have done is that we have built an app or a website around it, so the product is still the same. It's the same card product, same insurance product, same lending product. We are not realizing the value of this data that exists outside of the conventional bank statement and bureau data. We don't underwrite differently now because we have access to new algorithms, new access to a lot of data infrastructure, so we are not doing some of those things, and we're still building those broad stroke customer segmentation that existed many, many years back. So all these three things: access to data, underwriting technology, and building customer behavior and building products for a customer of one, are things that are available for people like yourself and myself now, but we're still so much underutilizing that opportunity. So completely resonates with your
Yeah.
story, with the insights, and I think this makes extremely promising story, at least for myself. Thank you so much for doing this. Yeah.
Right. No, thank you so much, Ned, for expressing that. I don't think I could have said it better. I think, each financial institution has its own cycle of growth, right? So, right from fintechs, the adoption of technology, to a large enterprise like a regional or a global bank or a multi-finance company, when it comes to a market like like Indonesia. So I think the growth cycle varies, right? I mean, there are problems at different levels, the bigger the organization becomes, right? It is more complex as as a place. And I think the problems to solve at that layer is even more complex at from a, especially from a data and technology point of view, right? But what we've very interestingly seen is that the adoption of technology, at least from a fintech layer point of view, that has been roughly smoother than from an enterprise, rather than adoption from an enterprise. Now enterprises on the other hand, they know how to underwrite using some of these alternative data, but the because of the nature of bureaucracy and the nature of such a complex core banking system that they've built, right? The ability to sort of integrate a very lean platform, right? That in itself is very, so you need to decide to what extent can you really customize for enterprises, right? So that is something that we are still sort of struggling with as a as an organization, but it's working with these enterprise
Correct,
itself that will
correct,
define your
correct,
product
correct,
in the future. Because if they are able to consume, the fintechs would be very quick to consume these
correct,
kind of
correct.
products,
No,
right?
this is correct.
So
I absolutely agree with you.
right.
Also, Kunal, maybe you talked about the problem of fragmentation of data. You talked about how a lot of this data is still not in the purview of, let's say, mainstream data. You also talked about how we can underwrite this better. Could you help us zoom out a bit and walk us through what is this ecosystem you're talking about? We can talk about Indonesia particularly, but for example, somebody who's sitting in Singapore and India who might not even relate to the ecosystem, the landscape, why this problem needs to be solved. Could you paint a little more picture in terms of why is it fragmented, what data exists, what does not, and in more specific terms, and how is PowerGrid helping solve some of that challenges?
Sure, sure. Absolutely. See, I think what won't change between markets like India and Southeast Asia is the nature in which businesses have sort of started conducting transactions. Right. I think that the nature in which they do this has not changed, but I would say the platforms that they use, the speed at which the adoption has been picked up, that sort of varies from market to market, in my opinion, right now. But let's zoom back and think about how. So I'm going to particularly touch upon SMEs, and I'm going to touch upon in Indonesia as a market, but I'll get to there in a bit, right? But if you actually look at the last 10-12 years, you've seen the digital adoption of SMEs. If you in one of my podcasts with my advisor Arvind, I had also mentioned that last time when I was in India, I had actually gone to a pani puri stall, and that's where I saw that there was a QR code embedded on a tree trunk, and they were not accepting a cash based payment, right? This time, taking cash to India was absolutely useless, and I was so happy to sort of witness this, right? That there is a digital footprint for all transactions right now, right? In India as a market. So, and as opposed to the scene about 10-12 years back, wherein without cash, right, it was very difficult to for at least someone staying outside the country to sort of navigate and buy products and stuff like that. So whether it is selling, so from an SME point of view, the way I have seen evolution is that the way they sell, the nature in which SMEs sell their products, the nature in which they buy products in bulk, right? That tremendously has changed in the last few years, right? Now this has given birth to a lot of tools, a lot of exciting tools, that have come up in the market to solve these supply chain problems, right? Now naturally this has resulted in fragmentation of data, right? Now so that's on the SME side. Now let's cut to the financial institution side, right? When now of course when a business sort of finds multiple channels of growth, right? They need capital to do so, right? Now, when they need capital to do so, they either go for a funding or they go and apply for a loan, right? Now, when they go and apply for a loan, then what happens is that, what are the typical things that that a lender will ask for? Maybe KYC or KYB, if that exists in the market, or it could be bureau data, that if there is a corporate bureau data at all for that particular business, or bank statements, right? I mean, these are the predominant sources of data sets that they will consume, basis which they will underwrite and give a yes or a no decision, right? I'll come to what happens after the loan is approved later, because that is also a different world of problems, right?
Sure.
And you would know this better than I do, right? But but what I particularly, now
Huh.
let's go to Indonesia specifically as a market, right? What I love about Indonesia is the the kind of
Yes.
local tools that have emerged, as opposed to having adopted a lot of tools from the US or other parts of the market, right? I think that itself has created a very a very fragmented and a very cool ecosystem, wherein you can actually categorize the data sets across various categories, and you can understand the nature of the business right from a KYC angle, from an income perspective, income or sales perspective, from a logistics or their own purchase perspective, the consumer behavior, how their consumers are viewing them, right? This kind of this perspective, and the inherent nature of how the business kind of spends regularly, right? I mean, what kind of tools they use to spend on evolving themselves, right? Or so basically, these things, a lot of local tools have come up in Indonesia as a market, and coincidentally, a lot of them are also openly available. The data is openly available for customers, for everybody to get access to that data, right? Now, so this is something that I realize that if I were to sort of categorize these data sets into, let's say, banking as one category, or KYC KYB as a category, or e-commerce, or accounting systems, or POS data, right? Or maybe wallets data, and even telco data for very small micro SMEs perspective. This data is more than enough for um, for a financial institution to know everything about their business, whether it is businesses itself, or it is sole proprietors who are running their own shop, right? So this data can be so useful for lenders, and particularly not only for underwriting, even from a monitoring perspective, right? That once the underwriting is done, and if the loan is given, right, how do you monitor that the health of the customer on an ongoing basis, without of course bugging the customer, right? So at PowerCred, we've been able to solve that problem as well, that it's a you need an authentication for the first time from the customer, and then post which you can refresh and call for the data any number of times that you would like. And we can provide to you dashboards, and this dashboard can sort of help you understand the trend of that particular business over a period of time. So let's say if the sales are going up, you can actually cross sell and upsell products to them. If it's going down, you can actually apply a moratorium on the product, and restructure the loan in whichever way you would want to. So there's so much data that is available. But yeah, I mean, and luckily, we are
Correct.
seeing that
Correct.
kind of traction in the market to consume this kind of data as well.
This is super exciting. Actually, a lot of thoughts that come to my mind from this, what you mentioned about banking data, KYC data, e-commerce, like accounting data, POS data, wallet data. You talked about two things. One is the fragmentation. So that it probably, of course, is very early in the market. So there is no winner take all kind of product tool which is aggregating that data. So therefore, it has a great place for somebody like PowerCred to be able to capitalize on that segment. And then you also talk about that how you are able to use this data to underwrite. What your to your mind does do you uh, do you remember an example wherein you were able to underwrite or monitor a loan application or a loan product which you may have not been able to do in absence of this data, especially non-banking, non-bureau data? Is there an example that speaks to you that's in your heart that you felt very beautiful? Sure, of course.
I'm not going to name the financial institution, of course, but through my previous experience, of course, what um but this was more towards the consumer centric. If you know it's applicable to the consumer side, I think uh, a, a lot of it is applicable at least to the micro SME side. The nature of underwriting is not very different in both scenarios, right? Um, Now, there is a very bold financial institution which has now sort of captured more than 50% market share in the market. They have they you know initially we had the opportunity to work with them to build their digital platform, their LOS system, and the up to 15 to 20 million dong worth of loans they were able to provide
Wow.
just basis surrogate data. And and the surrogate data was data either from telco or from electricity bills, right, or from these kind of platforms, right? Just basis that they were able to push at least 5 to 7,000 loans in a day. That's the kind of scale that they hit. And when that is something that you see that you can derive income proxies from this kind of surrogate data, right? With not very high NPLs. I mean, of course, there will be NPLs in these kind of scenarios, but you're going to the mass segment, right? I mean, the idea is that you're not putting all your eggs in one basket, right? So, the kind of lending that they were able to do, and they're still the highest. They have the largest market share in a country like that, right? So, that I found so fascinating, and I realized, and nobody's doing that in Indonesia, right? And out of 70 million SMEs in a market like Indonesia, which is equivalent to the number of SMEs that are probably in India, right? 80-90% are the warungs or the tokos. So the nature of underwriting is going to be very similar, right? And nobody's really doing this, right? So is it so then I thought to myself, is it basically people are people scared of doing it, or is the data accessibility itself a problem, right? So we've established the I mean we've solved the problem of data accessibility. Now we are trying to educate the market of on sort of consuming this kind of data, surrogate data. And hopefully, I think, we'll be able to sort of make an impact soon
No,
with
that's
this
that's
segment.
fascinating again. Yeah,
Yeah.
I think so. Yeah, for the audience, when you underwrite, understanding somebody's cash flow or ability to generate income is a big part of your underwriting, because that drives and tells people, or that drives the lender, that can you repay the loan, can you
Yes.
pay back the loan. And Kunal is mentioning that looking at telco
Correct.
data and utility data, they were able to predict very highly of somebody's income statement. And of course, this applies to consumers, but what we have also seen historically is that consumer behavior and micro loans, micro SME behavior is very, very similar. So the argument here is that we can access some of these data points to understand somebody's cash flow position or income statement, which allows you to underwrite better in terms of how somebody can pay back a loan. Oh, very nice. This is super. Yeah, actually, to be honest, I, of course, go to Indonesia quite a bit. I talk to SMEs a bit, and I also realized that sometimes people think of their softwares and they try to slap that software on the SMEs, and then they want that to be able to digitize these interactions and transactions. What I've started to believe is that, one, you have to get closer to what exists. You really can't just change all these behaviors. For example, this telco data that you talked about, utility data that you talked about, you have to find a way to work around this ecosystem as opposed to create a new ecosystem on the side. And that's the point that you were also mentioning earlier, that there
Agree.
is so much fragmentation. but these platforms still have open access of their APIs to partners like yourself. So the ecosystem is fragmented, but there's
Yeah.
also an opportunity to aggregate, and there is a need to kind of work with the
Yes.
ecosystem as opposed to kind of change everything and work around.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, I think from a data aggregation point of view, of course, there are three, four methods of pulling data from these providers. Of course, we've consciously stayed away from scraping, right? I mean, that's something that we don't believe as an organization, and we also sort of feel that at some point the regulations will not permit this kind of thing. Maybe not today, but maybe in the future. So you might as well keep your product future ready, which is why aggregating data from the ecosystem itself took us a while to kind of so the two areas that we found very exciting was, in fact, the three areas that we found very exciting was the one is, of course, access to the open API framework, which is available with certain players. The second is strategic partnerships, right? Strategic partnerships can be of two kinds. One is either they monetize using this data, providing their data, or number two is they themselves realize that, boss, if I'm giving you my data, it's only helping my customer base grow on my platform. So it's indirectly going to help me um, improve my revenues, right? So these kind of partnerships also exist, and it's very forward thinking of certain partners to kind of believe that sharing this kind of data would benefit them. The if you just keep the data to yourself without opening up the ecosystem to access your data, you're actually being very counterproductive. Right? You're just trying to create like a mini ecosystem of your own, which you will never be aware of what's happening outside, right? So it's and the third part is that a lot of these data providers want to exchange you know data. So I'm happy to give you my data, but you should give me access to your platform as well for getting information about my customers, so that if I were to sort of roll out better products to them, right, then I can do so using this kind of a framework. So this has allowed us to grow quite heavily. So we've reached a stage where we have about 20-25 supply data partners today on the platform, and this has happened in the last 8 months since we've launched
No, perfect.
PowerCred.
Actually, again, it's interesting to see like how a lot of what you're saying resonates with my thinking as well. In the sense, because I've also
Right,
realized that Southeast Asia is a market that needs its own playbook. It's not as digitized as other markets are, and
right.
therefore the best way forward is via partnership. I mean, you can figure out that partnership via monetization, via exchange, but that is again something which I believe is the strongest growth hack for any provider like yourself, and in this market, because the it's yes, because of the fragmented nature and offline nature, it's very very valuable. One thing that kind of has been lingering on my mind since you spoke about it like 5 minutes back, that a lot of this conversation around quote unquote alternate data is within the context of underwriting, wherein, and we talked about how you can use that data to underwrite somebody's income statement or cash flow. You also talked about that you can use this data to monitor a loan product, like in terms of somebody's ability to pay back or not, and you can build monitoring products. Could you speak to that again? If you have an example, that would be ideal. But apart from that, what do you think PowerGrid is building to monitor those loan products and performance, and how are they helping fintech to build that monitoring product for them as well?
Okay, so first things first, that it's when you're getting access to SME data in itself, right? It's very important to follow the
Sure.
privacy policy and the authentication of the customer, right? I mean, the customer should be very well aware that you
Hmm.
are pulling their data, in fact, from these platforms. So first thing is first, that from a regulatory standpoint, we need to make sure that the SME is protected, or they understand why we are doing what we are doing, right? So that is that education is sort of something that is super important for us to give as a part of when we are authenticating and providing the data to the customer. Now, data of the customer. Now basically, let's cut to the chase, where once the customer is authenticated and given access to the data, the first step is to always, what we do is that we summarize the data. Comes in a very raw format, right? I mean, you it's either a JSON or a very raw Excel format, which is not really easily, and it's just a bunch of transactions and details on that particular platform. Which what sense will you make of this data, right? And I can, if I pass this data and give it to you directly, it's not going to make any sense to you. So the first thing what we do is that we summarize the data. We create like different kinds of categories of the summarization. One is that we create a profiling information. Second is we create the total sales data of that customer. Third is the the behavioral data of the of how their customers are viewing them, right? Because there are reviews, there are cancellations, right? You may have higher orders, but you may not have receivables. That says something about that particular SME. Right now, these kind of insights are very useful for SMEs to understand the nature of the business, right? So so what we provide to our customers is basically a dashboard wherein they will be able to either graphically or through data itself view firstly the flexibility of the data, right? I mean, let's so a customer can call for 3-month historical data, 6-month historical data, 12 months, all the way up to when that SME started their business on that particular platform. So that's the flexibility we give to our customers to choose how much of historical data they want to push. um, now once the data is pulled from there and given to the lender, we start creating a dashboard where it's easy to view these categories of data on a single uh, view. Now um, now because we are not scraping data from these data sources, right? They are direct APIs that are being used for consuming. The point is that you don't need to ask the customer to re-authenticate again and again, even if they change their password or on their platforms, right? They don't have to re-authenticate again. Once the ID is, we create an ID against the authentication, and that ID is passed on to the lender, and we tell the lender, you pull the data, you refresh and pull the data any number of times you want. Now we've given a simple refresh option on the dashboard. You refresh the data automatically, the dashboard kind of pulls out the latest information of the customer. This benefits them in two ways. One is that if an applicant was not a borrower today because there was not enough data for them, they still have a lead on their platform, and they can potentially convert that to a customer in the future once they see volume sort of picking up for that particular customer. That's one use case, right? The second use case is that once you give out a loan to a customer, these repeat health checks can actually help you monitor the health of the loan, right? They will be able to give you insights after 1 month, let's say, or after 2 weeks, whether the, will this guy really pay back the loan on time, right? Something very interesting about telco data is that we will be able to also give you information on the digital penetration of that particular phone number, and that is an indication of whether the phone number is fake, or whether it's a um, uh, is that phone number regularly used by the customer. Because if there's a lot of digital penetration with that phone number, chances are that the customer
Hmm.
won't easily replace that
So
number,
for our audience, could you
right?
explain what digital penetration means and how does it talk about fakeness of the data?
Yes. Sure, sure. So, for example, if let's say you have a phone number, right, and from your phone number, I'm able to pull out that this number is in fact registered with Netflix. It's registered with Shopee, with Tokopedia, with Instagram, with multiple platforms, with LinkedIn, right, wherein you actually are um, on paid and unpaid platforms, right? I can actually pull this kind of data for you, I will be able to, in fact, tell whether this number is it a fake SIM card, because Indonesia it's very common actually to replace. It's very easy to replace SIM cards in Indonesia, right? So you really need an authentic number, and this becomes a very important information. Now, from a health check point of view, keep calling for that API to actually check whether is the digital penetration increasing, decreasing, or is there a certain point where this number is deactivated, right? So that also tells you something about the application. So all your so from a sales perspective, it will tell you whether you should upsell or apply changes to the loan, or from a fraud perspective, it will tell you whether this guy is um, being shady about his phone number or his behavior and stuff like that, right? So these things really help you as a lender to understand the
Got it.
customer really well, right,
Interesting.
on a
Yeah.
repeat basis,
Actually, for the
right?
audience, again, when you underwrite a loan application, there's a 5C model which assesses somebody's ability to pay back. And one of the 5C is called character, like somebody's character. And what Kunal is mentioning seems to be very closely aligned to be able to predict somebody's character, depending upon digital penetration, how this data, how this SIM card is being used for accessing other products as well. So it can be used for underwriting, it can be used for fraud. A lot of manifestations of this can be valuable, and especially in a market like Indonesia, wherein, as you rightly said, there's a lot of prevalence of for fraud via using inauthenticated SIM card or your KTP information as well. Actually, so very very valuable there. So one of the things that you and I talk generally, and a very very often quoted example in fintech lending is how can we lend to the thin file customers. Thin file customers is the customer who don't have a lot of financial trail available, either by virtue of bank statements or bureau data, and therefore by conventional terms it becomes very hard to lend out to these borrowers. Do you have experience, expertise in being able to lend to this customer? What have you learned working with your partners that can you even lend them? Is it a utopian place, or is it actually a practical reality where you have seen this? And how are you able to help these fintech providers lend to these thin file customers?
Yeah, I think uh, this is something that's very exciting, and it's a continuous evolving problem that is that's very close to us, right? So what do we who are these thin file customers, right? I mean, first let's talk about who these customers are. Any individual who's either running a side hustle, and this is very largely seen in Indonesia, while they are running their own employment somewhere, right? They have their own side hustle going on, right? It's a very entrepreneurial country, which is what I love about the market, right? um, so these kind of customers were selling products maybe online, offline, and stuff like that. The warungs, the smaller, very small kirana store equivalents in Indonesia as a market, right? The third one is tokos, right? And home based businesses where you're either making a product at home and selling it to your community, or you're selling it on various platforms, right? I would classify thin file customers as broadly these kind of customers, unless you think there would be more to this. I mean, largely I think this would take up about 70-80% in my opinion of the thin file customer market, right? um, so coming to the problems that we solve for them, as I said, I think previously that the nature of underwriting for uh, consumers versus these kind of folks are going to be very similar, and that's why the power of surrogate data is takes over, wherein they they have an average spending somewhere, right? I mean, they are spending money either on electricity, they're spending money on telcos, they're they may have wallets, right? Wallets like an ovo or a gopay kind of wallet, wherein um, uh, you know Gojek as a platform, right, has a lot of I mean, a lot of penetration in Indonesia as a market. Now, this kind of data becomes so useful for lenders to understand the behavior of an SME in two parts, right? One is that whether is the customer paying their bills on time, what kind of billing do they have, and that kind of creates an income proxy for the particular customer, right? So I think these thin file customers, this would be logically the only way to underwrite them, at least from a PowerCred standpoint, right? But I see this growing quite a bit. As I said, initially, that nowadays if you go to any kirana store or a Varung, right, there are always QR based. There's always a QR based scanning and paying, right? Even if that is 20% today, that number is going to grow to 50-60% in the next few years, right? And eventually, we are going to get to a cashless economy. That's the end state, right? So the digital penetration is only growing for these customers. So it's going to be an evolving ecosystem that we create. Right now we have, let's say, 4 5 data points that can cover and give you some level of income proxy. It may not be 95% or 98% accurate, but at least more accurate than having no data or very limited data in itself, right? So yeah, I think this is where the problem exists. It is vastly a huge problem, but there are solutions available for these customers today.
So, Kunal, we talked about so far in terms of how you're making this data accessible for your fintech companies to be able to lend, manage fraud, and monitor these transactions. And of course, it seems that you are neck deep in consuming data, learning about data, and figuring out how do you create value for your partners. Are there techniques? Are there processes that you have deployed at PowerCred for you and your team members to be able to learn about these data technologies in terms of data munging, cleaning up data, and also building patterns? Have you done any work there as well?
Um, yeah. So again, I would say that we are not nearly there in terms of defining these processes yet. But there are tools that we use, particularly certain CRMs, etc., that we are using to capture intelligence of what our customer is enjoying, what our customer is finding really useful, and what's not selling, and importantly, why is it not selling, right? I think that's where a CRM kind of becomes very critical for our kind of business, right? Wherein for so today we are talking to about 20 plus customers in Indonesia as a market, right? um, that's There's a lot of information available that typically, while communicating with the customers, we don't we capture maybe 80% of it, and then we sort of note down 60% of it somewhere, and it's lost in communication, right? The first thing that we've practiced as a strategy now is that at the end of every day, we need to update our CRM with every possible detail that we have learned from the customer. And this is a half an hour practice that we have to do as an organization. Of course, as we scale, it will become a problem. We'll figure out, when it becomes a problem then, and how do we sort of imbibe this kind of culture then. But right now, for every deal, the intelligence that we kind of have today is to an extent that we know which what kind of lending do they do, what kind of customers do they lend to, what data categories would be most important for them, what value can that be can this generate for them, different stakeholders in a particular financial institution, what would their pain points be, what would their KRAs be, right? Which Why is this particular deal taking so much of time for us to move to the next stage, right? It could be a product problem, it could be a sales problem, it could be a customer problem in itself, right? It may not be in the priority. So these are areas where we kind of aggregate our own intelligence, and create our own reports where where we can understand the stage of every deal, what they like, what they dislike, right? What can we push first? And that kind of also gives our tech team a sense of what kind of roadmap they need to build and what they need to focus on in the next 6 months, right? So this has been tremendous. This is not something that I was doing a quarter earlier, and due to this, we faced a lot of issues because every time a customer picked up a requirement, we quickly built it, and then we realized that the market may not need this. It's only specific to that customer. So it is wasted effort gone for just a few dollars of revenue. So now we've kind of, this intelligence gives us a added benefit to really understand what direction the market is taking and what direction our product needs to sort of take from here. So that is the kind of value that we've given our CRM, and this is thanks to one of our advisors as well, who has been sort of incessantly telling us, warning us about these aspects of complexity, right?
Uh, could you speak to us, and you can choose to speak to whatever detail you may want to, because we understand it's confidential information. Any counterintuitive insights in terms of where the market is headed, what's been happening on the ground, that you have uncovered basis this process and practice, and how has it impacted your product roadmap? And again, feel free to answer in as much detail as you would be comfortable with.
Sure, sure. So I think one of the biggest intelligence that we've gathered from our sorry, one of the biggest learnings that we've gathered from our from capturing data in the last quarter is that there's a lot to solve in the traditional underwriting itself, right? Which customers are doing today, and that is something that becomes a very easy area for, because they know that kind of that part of their business, right? They know what they need to solve for there, right? That becomes a very easy area for us to enter that particular account once we solve that problem. And then alternative data becomes a very interesting area where we can push for upselling as an offering once they become comfortable with this kind of data. So earlier we were in that practice of directly trying to sell alternative data to the customers. It's a very bullish market, right? And people are very cautious about spending money in today's market, right? The but the solution that we quickly realized that in the traditional underwriting space itself, the data pipes itself are very weak, or right. So we've started working on providing those pipes to the customer, right? And then pushing alternative as an upselling opportunity once we have enough use
Right.
cases on the traditional sides. And then the power of having traditional and alternate data is that you can triangulate data now, right? In the future, basically you can reconcile data across various platforms and provide even stronger intelligence to the customer,
Got it.
right? So this is one of the areas which we are now sort of
So,
focusing on.
so it's basically layered evangelization or layered onboarding, wherein you onboard your customers on what they understand and know of, which can be mainstream data. And once you onboard them, then you also kind of educate them about alternative data and how this can be useful. So that allows you to be able to onboard customers a lot better
Yes.
than just selling under alternative data. And because the customer is onboarded and they're using
Yes.
your mainstream data, it and adding a layer of alternative data
Hmm.
becomes a lot more easy for them. And then they can also use that data to triangulate information about, again, underwriting, monitoring, and fraud. So that's an approach that has changed over time by
Absolutely.
capturing these insights from your customers. Is that fair? Oh,
Absolutely.
perfect. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Thank you. This is
100%.
very, very helpful. I think, as a business leader yourself, as a product leader myself, one of the biggest challenge that we all face is hiring great talent to build some of these products. And to be honest, that's one of the areas where I realized that as a market, we lack a lot of middle managers who can build nice fintech products. And that's one thing that I'm trying to solve with this podcast as well, to bring in people like yourself and talk to our middle managers and help them gain perspective on how what does it take to build a nice fintech products. Uh, could you speak to us, and given you have got so much reliance on data and technology, what kind of talent do you look for and seek for? And second, is there a gap in your mind wherein you want a certain kind of talent but you don't find them as available in the market?
So let me put it this way, that the stage at which we are in today, right? We need we need folks in the team who aspire to be entrepreneurs in the future, right? And I think we've been and when I say this, I'm what I mean is that the ability for a customer, for sorry, for a person to kind of take ownership in what they are doing. And ownership is a very loose term, right? It means that they are so uh, obsessed with building something from 0 to 1, right? Without thinking of whether this could uh, potentially, help them make more money or not, right? I think this is something that is the first aspect that I'm looking at when I look at talent in the market, right? We're um now it's very hard to find this talent because you know being future founders or being founders, it's not something which is easy, right? I mean, it's you need to let go of the kind of comfortable life that you're leading at the moment. It's a long term reward, long term. um, the rewards that you see here is super long term right now, which is why I'm, in terms of giving equity to someone, and I don't have a challenge, right? The But if someone asks for a comfortable salary, that that is something that becomes a little bit of a challenge for us today. Not because cash flows is a problem, but because it kind of helps us understand that this person is not here to build this person is here to be comfortable. We really need hustlers at the moment, right? The skill sets to me is very easy to acquire, but the first part of the talent, which is where you're obsessed about building something, and you become very passionate about it, right? That is very difficult to find, right? um, so this is the first aspect that I look at when I'm recruiting talent across, right? The second is, I'm not really looking for very experienced people at the moment, because experienced people also come with, again, this could be a bias, but too much of experience also comes with mind too many things that your baggage and things that you're set on, right? Which is why slightly fresher minds, or someone who's been in the market for a few years, um, who wants to build a 0 to 1 kind of a startup, right? That becomes an ideal spot for us, because all of us are alike. We all come from that kind of background. It's very easy to do the dirty plumbing today than sit and direct people to do things, right? So I think, yeah, these are the two things that I'm looking to solve today: build a very solid foundation from a founding team perspective. I think there are certain gaps that we do have, but we are solving them. I think we are a quarter away from solving these kind of problems.
Maybe one interesting thing. So, for example, you are sitting on a gold mine, if I may, where you have access to a lot of data and you are helping people underwrite. Do you also see PowerCred moving into adjacent opportunities apart from what you're doing right now? Again, this could be something, feel free to answer and in as much detail as you
Hmm.
feel comfortable with. But are there
Yeah,
adjacent opportunities which you
yeah.
evaluate or which you're excited about for PowerCred per se? Nice.
This So there are multiple areas that this can sort of lead to. The one is the data in itself, and the second is the intelligence of that data. Right now, lending becomes effectively the first use case that we are solving for, right? This data can effectively help even SMEs themselves to understand where they are kind of where they are performing well, where they are not performing well, what they need to improve, right? Because the fact that they use multiple tools on their own, right? So it becomes a very interesting analytics platform for them to view everything in a single place, right? On their entire business. So that becomes one exciting area where we can sort of also move towards, where we go directly to SMEs. um, the second area is that we could potentially we have like a network of lenders on the platform. We'll have ample amount of SME data, through the pipes that we build. Um, the if at some stage we directly plan to go to SMEs, we can actually build a bidding platform for the SMEs to apply for a loan, and if essentially become like a policy bazaar for lenders, right? That becomes another use case that could be exciting. A third use case that I am personally very excited about is the sustainability use case, which the same data which is used today for underwriting, creating a credit score. This same kind of data can also be used for building a carbon score. And 2024 onwards, that across multiple markets, carbon tax is going to be a massive element of expense that SMEs are going to take, right? This kind of data can actually help SMEs understand where they are spending more, carbon footprint, right? And essentially, there are companies in the market that are also analyzing this kind of data from these platforms and creating standards, right? Now we can consume these standards and this score from them, and also provide it to our lenders to avail green financing for the SMEs. So this becomes another area which I am very passionate and excited about scaling into. It will take a long time for us to get there, but it's nonetheless another area which I definitely want to look into.
Good. Thanks, Kunal. This was very, very informative. I learned a lot myself. If people have to reach out to you, what's the best way for you to kind of connect to you? Is it over Twitter? Is it over Instagram or email? What's the best way?
Yeah, I think LinkedIn is the easiest place to connect with me on,
Cool. So
and
we'll
yeah,
put your link
always
on the
available for a
podcast as
chat.
well. And thanks for
Yeah.
speaking to us, Kunal, and really appreciate you talking to us.